There's something unsettling about horror movies that come from nature. No ghosts, no killers, but animals behaving in a way that they don't normally. Released in 1979 and based on a novel by Martin Cruz Smith, Nightwing blends horror, Native American themes, and a real animal, the vampire bat, to create an excellent movie that leans into the horror of real animals. While the movie exaggerates some aspects of this animal to lean into the fear, the real biology behind these animals is just as unsettling and even more fascinating in real life than it is in fiction. Nightwing follows a Native American deputy named Young Man Durant, who returns to his reservation only to find that something has killed the livestock. And it didn't just kill the livestock, it drained all of the blood from the bodies. And later, it's not just the livestock that are being attacked, it's people too. As the attacks escalate, the film becomes a mix of horror from nature and cultural tension, and Youngman is caught between scientific explanations and traditional beliefs about nature's balance being disturbed. But what is causing all these deaths? A swarm of vampire bats that have migrated well beyond the normal range that they are typically found in. Unlike other creature features of the time, Nightwing isn't just about survival. The characters have to understand why this is happening in the first place. Nightwing is not a movie about vampire bats. It's a movie about what happens when nature's balance is thrown off. The film suggests that human interference, whether it's environmental disruption or just cultural disregard, has pushed nature into retaliation. The bats in the movie are not evil. They're responding. They are starving and desperate, and they will eat whatever they can to survive, and that includes people. Nightwing follows a trend from the 1970s where in horror movies, the main antagonist was an animal rather than a person. Movies like Jaws and Piranha from the 1970s also had a similar concept where the animal was the antagonist in the horror movie. But Nightwing has an extra cultural layer to it. Later Jaws movies would also adopt a similar cultural layer to them, with Hawaiian culture and voodoo magic, but that's so far off of what the original movie was about, and the later movies weren't that good anyway. Back to Nightwing, there's an underlying message about listening to land, tradition, and warnings that are often ignored until it's too late. In this section, I'll be going over the biology, ecology, and behavior of the real star of this movie, the vampire bats. In reality, vampire bats, specifically Desmondus rotundus, are mostly found in Central and South America, and they don't typically migrate into the United States like they do in Nightwing. This is one of the biggest creative liberties that the movie takes, is having the vampire bats way more north than they are typically found. The other biggest creative liberty the movie takes is the way the vampire bats feed. Vampire bats don't really attack in the way that they are shown in the movie. They instead make a small, painless incision on the prey. Typically, the prey is a form of mammal, which can sometimes actually include humans. Bites on humans are very rare and are oftentimes unnoticed because the bite is painless. But in certain Amazonian communities, between 23 and 88% of people have been bitten by a vampire bat. However, this is because these communities are living within large populations of vampire bats, which gives them more of a chance to encounter vampire bats, and which leads to a higher chance of being bitten by a vampire bat. If you live within the range of large populations of vampire bats or near their range, you're more likely to encounter vampire bats and are more likely to be bitten by a vampire bat than someone who does not live near vampire bats. So just kind of keep that statistic in mind. They live near vampire bats. They are more likely to be bitten by vampire bats because they encounter them more often. Despite the statistic that I did just go over, we are not normally on the vampire bats menu. They typically drink blood from cows, sheep, and goats, not normally from us. They also don't completely drain the animal of its blood. They lap up the blood and then suck it down, and they have saliva that keeps the animal bleeding as long as they are feeding on it. They are very specialized for this food source. They can even use heat to detect where blood vessels are, and they are usually light enough that when they land on their prey, the prey doesn't even feel it. Vampire bats are also very social animals. If one of them doesn't get food from the prey, another bat will regurgitate up the blood that they got, and they will share that. Very gross, but that is a huge thing for animals to do. Of course, there is some truth to the way the vampire bats behave in the movies, but it is greatly exaggerated. In the film, the bats attack aggressively in large, coordinated swarms that target humans specifically. I cannot stress this enough. Bites on humans are very, very rare. Like I mentioned previously with that 88% statistic, that is because these people live in communities that are very close to large populations of vampire bats, and they are just more likely to be bitten by them because they live so close to so many of them. In the movie, the vampire bats are shown to coordinate in massive swarms. This is not true. Vampire bats are opportunistic feeders. They do not coordinate in packs like orcas or wolves do. However, the movie does touch on the idea of these vampire bats having rabies. Vampire bats can carry rabies, and if they were to bite a person, they would transmit that rabies to the person. While Nightwing isn't the most scientifically accurate movie out there, I do love the atmosphere that this movie has. The movie leans really heavily into the idea of isolation. The wide open landscapes of the reservation are completely juxtaposed by the feeling of being trapped and that primal fear of being hunted by an animal at night. The movie is also a lot slower than modern horror day movies, which I love because you can really get the feeling of dread and let that sink in while you're watching the movie. You really are watching the characters lose control of the situation. Vampire bats are not the only animals that are comparable to vampires. During times when food is scarce, vampire finches of the Galapagos Islands will peck into other seabirds, especially boobies, and drink the blood from them. There are even animals that bear a passing resemblance to vampires. Walruses have fang-like tusks protruding from their mouth. The Smilodon, or saber-toothed cat, also has fangs protruding out of its mouth. But an animal that has what might be the most striking resemblance to a vampire is the water deer. Water deer are a small species of deer from Asia, and what look like fangs are actually tusks. Males are the only ones to possess these tusks, and they use them to combat other males for territory or mates. Other common animals that may behave like vampires are ticks, mosquitoes, and leeches. There are also vampire squids that, instead of getting their name due to their behavior, is because of their cloak-like webbing around their tentacles. The vampire squid's scientific name is also Vampirothetus infernalis, which literally means the vampire squid of hell. But keep in mind, no matter how evil these animals may sound or seem or act or behave or eat or anything like that, no animal is truly evil. They're just doing what they can to survive. And that includes the bats in this movie. In conclusion, I loved this movie. I love this whole era of horror movies where the main antagonist is the animal. And I love how it uses real biology as the foundation for this horror. Vampire bats don't need to be monsters to be scary. And when you look at nature close enough, you can already see how horrifying it really can be.